Hello guys! Welcome back to Not Just Mecha. It's Marco here, and today we speed paint in high quality with acrylics using just 3 quick, super efficient steps, perfect for all levels of experience. Well, technically 2 steps, because the third one is kind of optional, but I didn't want to brag too much in the opening.
Value sketching is a great academic way to level up your understanding of lights, shadows, volumes and contrast, and get a better control over every subsequent stage of the painting process. But if you bring it to its extreme consequences, and you turn it into a complete, fully finished grisaille, it can also be a terrific speed painting tool by itself, especially in the age of contrast paints. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page up here, where I publish the real-time footage of my videos and extra cool stuff. Thanks a million, guys! With a passive push from the style of the artworks of a box and rulebook, and the drawings on the cards, I decided to go full illustrational and a tiny bit cartoony on this super dynamic, sexy Skaven. Part to try catching the energy of all this virtual movement, and part to be able to use more powerful poppy colors that remind me of the old colorful metal Skaven of the Warhammer Fantasy era, for which I have a strong personal attachment. Plus, I don't like to use too many dark, muted tones on such tiny and thin models, because as you can probably tell from the official paint job, they tend to swallow information and visual interest into a dark, greyish smudge difficult to read, especially in person and on the gaming board. The idea is crazily simple. Paint the entire model with all the details and its complete final rendering, but only in black and white. When I teach this method in classes and workshops, I don't take shortcuts, and I urge my students to do all the work by hand, to properly internalize the reasoning about light, values and volumes, to better understand the richness of the visual information that a dense pattern of brushstrokes in the foundational layers can add to the final product, and to show that a brush is always the best and only tool you really need. But here we are talking about speed painting, and speed painting is all about cutting corners and cheating. Jokes aside, if you are just starting your journey into grisaille and advanced underpainting techniques, using just a few gentle, almost transparent passes of grey from an airbrush, or like I still love to do for armies and large warbands, simply using a zenithal mist of grey from a spray can, can be a great way to break the ice with a scary black primer and the basic shapes of the models. And extremely fine, controlled and directional dry brushing can also be an option. But in general, I'm not a big fan of the texture it creates. And if you are going full brush, well, at that point you can just sketch the volumes and get the full spectrum of the exercise. The idea for less experienced painters is for sure to get a rough automatic rendering of the major volumes, but I suggest using it mostly as a future reference for similar shapes, maybe even taking pictures of this initial stage, especially if you plan to work on other similar models for a warband or an army. And if you are a more advanced hobbyist, or you simply want the full speed of the speed painting process, you can just cut the first stage and focus on the fun, I'll be honest with you, more visually rewarding elements. I'm always running against time, but but I want to do most of the work with the brush. So this kind of quick, blurred, dramatic grey zenithal is a good compromise. And I move to the wet palette, on which I have only white paint and a bit of medium on the side. Simply following logic, I used to set my palette for this kind of grayscale works with black and white, because it seems pretty obvious to have the option of black at hand. But going deeply into this rabbit hole, and with more practice under my belt, I realized that black in this stage is only a huge distraction. Acrylic gouache has still some of the watercolor properties of real gouache, so it's particularly easy to use in every possible level of transparency and dilution, with still a crazy stability of pigments and a great tinting power. But with a bit of fighting and maybe some extra medium in the mix, you can obtain the same behavior from any acrylic paint. Working on top of black or a dark rough sketch, you already have all the shadows and the lower values you need. And working with all these different, potentially infinite transparencies or opacities of white, you can easily create every possible tone of the grayscale, simply overlapping paint on the base. Keeping black out of the palette, aka not having any real way of taking a step back, helped me being more mindful about the placement and the meaning of my brushstrokes, maintaining the focus on constantly push the work forward. That's always an healthy attitude to painting in general, not only while speed painting. Of course, if in the final stages of the grisaille I need to render a deep cut or a sharp line, I don't have problems using a bit of black. But it's rarely to mix some kind of grey or to re-establish a shadow. And it's something that I do mostly for this kind of drawn elements, because the fluid, highly saturated paints I'll use later will automatically take care of the other sharp dark elements, filling by capillarity stuff like panel lines, deep crevices and undercuts. We often talked about the many benefits of training and working with a limited palette. Well, you cannot have a palette more limited than this one. And I honestly think that this is the best way to understand how much control you have on a paint job and impact on the final product, simply playing with the values of shapes and details. Precisely when I'm speed painting, there are two situations in which going heavy into a highly or completely rendered underpainting is my absolute favorite approach. One is when I'm facing sculpts with a ton of dense, complex details, to quickly understand, map and define all the tiny shapes before committing to colors, without all the flashy distractions they bring into the mix. So basically using the grisaille to simplify the work by chunking it into smaller bits. And the other one is kind of the extreme opposite, in every logical and practical way. That's when I have models that, except for the most basic shapes, don't have enough 3D elements to simply hit with a brush. In these cases, in order to make the models more interesting, I feel the need to compensate with more brushwork, painted and often drawn elements. And these new Skaven totally fall into this second category. That, by the way, is the best type for your first experiments and general training with this approach, because the whole visual information really have to come from you. I am dedicating an average of 20-30 minutes to each model. And as you can see, most of the work is dedicated to painting layers of moving fur and textures of clothes and fabric, because they are probably more than 90% of these models. And you must do something to make them more interesting to look at. You probably noticed that my general set of values tend to be in the medium-high spectrum of the value scale. And that's because I'm already taking in account the behavior of pigments in the following step. Even working with extreme transparencies, pigments still represent a barrier between the luminosity of the underpainting and your eyes. So, starting from a higher point, I'm sure to end up with a good set of lights. And if you want to look at it in a different perspective, simply filter a spot with an extra shadow from the same palette. It's easier and faster than to re-establish a full set of lights and highlights. Time for the second stage and colors. And I want to start with a quick glimpse of the palette at the end of this macro step, because from here everything is a bit easier to explain. I'm not economical or contained in this stage. Values, volumes and details are for sure our essential, critical foundation, but colors are everything else, and what really brings the model to life. So I don't save on shades, tones, temperatures and their variety. In the average, I have on the palette 3 shades for every major color of my scheme. And as you can see from the inconsistencies in the transparent pools, I tend to mix a bit the different hues to add complexity, depth and extra variety. Contrast paints and every other product of that family are just paint, and you should use it as any other paint. Mixing, adjusting consistency, dilutions, transparency, as your work needs. More than in any other style or technique, here transparency is absolutely crucial, especially in the first applications when we are still taming and adjusting the paint from the pot to our needs. GW contrast and most of pure acrylic inks have a strong impact and a serious staining power. So I need to be careful, because again, the idea, or maybe better, the ambition, is to use the whole information contained in the grisaille for all the heavy lifting. Water is my main thinning agent, but I always have on the palette a bit of medium to bring back some consistency and thickness and make the paint less independent from the movement of the brush. And retarder. Yes, you are allowed to use this stuff. that unlocks incredible possibilities, and that working with this kind of thin, watery layers that tend to pool and quickly create stains is a real game changer. A medium can give you density, some extra dilution because it obviously contains water, and extra transparency good for glazes and filters because it's a translucent solvent, but it doesn't do anything for your drying times. Well, to be more precise, since it's the vehicle of the acrylic binding elements of your paints, it probably speeds up a bit the drying time. So, if you need some serious pliability and extra working time for your mixes, grab a bottle of acrylic retarder from your local art store. What I'm doing here is to work highly saturated filters, wet on wet, directly on the models, with the relaxing mental freedom of being able to focus only and exclusively on the interesting chromatic flow of tones, because all the rest of the work is done. Check how I set the tones for the non-metallic blades. Or the bases. I let paint, shades and tones simply flow. Again, water gives me transparency, medium gives me consistency and precision, and the retarder gives me time. Even stuff like a localized, powerful green glow from below becomes incredibly easy to paint. This is what I got with a couple of extra more localized filters and shades, and a unifying coat of matte varnish. You know that I don't like varnish for its flattening effect, that in a more classic situation completely kills the depth of layers and applications. But here that's precisely what I want. I want values and tones to finally become a single entity in every possible way. To the final step, the stage that is technically optional, and in an ideal situation, I shouldn't feel the need to do, of opaque adjustments. With a perfect use of a traditional grisaille, I shouldn't need this step, because the underpainting is ideally the complete, fully polished and refined final product, just in black and white. And the chromatic filters are applied with extreme control and precision. But again, this is speed painting, and here and there, I have willingly sacrificed precision for extra speed. As always, speed painting is about finding solutions for non-ideal situations. The good news is that shadows, midtones, and most of the lights are perfectly in place, and the only things that usually need a few touch-ups are the very extreme highlights. The better news is that their map is all in place, so I just need to quickly reinstate and enhance their presence and sharpness with a few defining brushstrokes. The palette is always the truest reflection of the painter's intentions. And here you can see how my choices are all about extreme high values and a good chromatic variety to cover the different highlights. As in any other stage, the work is fast and extremely simple. Because the range of what I have to do is so small and specific that I can completely shut down my brain and just let the brush flow. And here is the final result. I closed this speed painting session with a satisfying average time of 1 hour per model. That, even if not a mind-blowing record for my standards, it's still a solid result, without the usual accelerating boost of airbrush and oil paints. Plus, I was having a lot of fun, and I have indulged in some extra brushstrokes. But as always, speed is mostly a byproduct of experience and practice. And what I really want to deliver is the crazy practical simplicity of each step taken by itself, and the extreme versatility of working with the grisaille mindset, especially referred to all the other videos in which you saw me using the information of the underpainting in dozens of different ways, with a variety of different tools and types of paint, to reach an incredibly wide spectrum of different final visual goals and effects.
If you like this video, give it a like and subscribe. Remember that you can ask me anything down below with a comment, and you can follow my projects during the week using one of my socials. And if you want to support my work, check my Patreon page and join the community, or maybe ask for a commission. See you next week, guys!